Cleveland, Ohio, a city sometimes known to be violent, is currently moving in the direction of reduction. Today, we're going to have a conversation on what that looks like. All right, welcome to the Cleveland Pulse podcast. I'm your host, Edwin Hubbard Jr., and I'm here to introduce to you a very special guest and someone who I am personally a fan of, Myesha Watkins. Myesha, I'm going to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and tell them what organization you work for.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. You know, I've been watching on social media and I was like, when am I going to get on this podcast? And not that the invite wasn't extended. We just been working with our schedules. But Myesha Watkins, y'all can call me My, born and raised in the city of Cleveland, graduate of John Marshall High School. Education is in social work, so I've always been committed to people, families, and communities. From there, I transitioned to nonprofit work as an executive director of Cleveland Peacemakers Incorporated. And just in August, tomorrow will be 6 months, I was appointed to run the inaugural Office of Violence Prevention for Cuyahoga County.
The Myesha I know, was in working with the Peacemakers, right? And so when I thought about violence prevention, I thought about somebody who stood right there in the center of it all. It was you. I know that you have done this work for a number of years, incredibly difficult work, but I know that you're proud of that work. Tell me, what led you to work in that space?
I think I was just called there. I got a call from a mentor that said Cleveland Peacemakers was hiring for a case manager supervisor. And at that time, when you work in communities, there are so many different forms of violence that gun violence wasn't even on my radar. I heard gunshots in my community growing up, but I never knew it was a group of people dedicated to it. In my hood, it was just how do we ensure that food insecurity was tackled? But as I continue to develop as a professional, at any given moment in our city, there can be thousands of people working on different crises. And so when I got the call to apply for the position, this was my first time being in tune with violence prevention. And what I knew I was good at was being a social worker. I knew I was great at connecting with people, understanding people, working in communities. So I just honed in on that skill. And that was in October 2019. And by January 2020, I was named the interim director and then transitioning manager. And then I was named the first time executive director of Cleveland Peacemakers. And why I say I feel like I was called, the transition was so fast. And what I've learned is that when you care for people and you're rooted in community, you can do anything because all it takes is relationships. But even while I was thinking about that, I was reminded that when I was in 7th grade, I survived a home invasion. But when I applied for the job, I didn't think that I was directly connected to gun violence at all. But in 7th grade, someone broke into our home. My sister, my mother, my brother, and I was there. And they put a gun to the back of my head, demanding things that we did not have and threatened to kill us. And I think it was that moment when I heard my mom say, "Kill me, don't kill my kids." I was like, dog, what? This is real. And I am glad to say that all of us survived and no lives were lost. But mentally and emotionally, we're all still scarred. And so I think that was my connection to violence prevention that I wasn't reminded of until my daughter told me that she didn't want to get shot and killed. And so I believe that it's my responsibility from my own experiences, my daughter's shared experience with the trauma that comes with me doing the work, to be able to do my best to eradicate gun violence and any form of violence in our county.
I was going to say, you're already starting to answer it. Take me through that space, that you worked in and how you were able to maintain it. What type of mentality did you have to wake up and do that work every single day?
First of all, the violence prevention space is a male-dominated space. And to be a woman coming into that space where your credibility is questioned, although I'm from the city of Cleveland, I've endured some of the same challenges that my peers and colleagues have endured. But because I took advantage of opportunities, my credibility was questioned all the time. Who do you think you are? You haven't been shy. You haven't shot anyone. You haven't been gang affiliated. You haven't been to prison. And I was just so frustrated because I was thinking, why are you making it hard for me when I'm exactly who you're trying to change in a community, right? Like you're doing the work that you're doing so that people can have an outcome like I did. So let's just work together. So I had to shatter through some ceilings and like prove myself in this work. And the sad reality is I had to step outside of our city to get all the things that I needed to come back to our city to make it what it is now as it relates to violence prevention in this small space that I occupy. But it's been challenging, and it has not been without tears. Violence prevention is like hard work, and it's hard work. But the hard part of it is that people die every day. People are shot every day. And the organization that I led at Cleveland Peacemakers, sometimes we were some of the first people to be aware and to have that conversation with families and friends that their loved one was shot and killed at the hospital, to support them at the funeral homes, to be on the other side at the courtroom. It was just really challenging and a lot of emotions to navigate at once. But I wouldn't change my purpose in this work at all, no matter how hard it is.
Let's talk about gun violence as it pertains to Cleveland. You know, I think most people don't know, is gun violence this something that typically happens with youth? Is this something that typically happens with adults? Or are these the main cases that are thought about? Is it just, you know, people pulling a gun and shooting each other, or is it more so related to robbery and things of that nature?
So I like to share first that nationally, the average shooter is age 27. I think when you talk about like trends, right now it appears that young people are driving violence. Then we also have to take into account, if young people are driving violence, where are these guns coming from? Like, how do we hold the manufacturers accountable for the accessibility to firearms in our communities? Who are bringing them here? Because no young person should be able to buy a firearm legally. The law says that. And then I think we have to pay attention to our laws. Like in Ohio, our gun laws are horrible. You have to stand your ground law. You have, you don't need a license or training to carry a firearm. And my position is not if you should own or not own a firearm. Is that how do we protect people who should not have them? It's not about your amendments. It's not about your rights. Everybody has the right to bear arms, but how do we ensure that the people who should not, that they should not have a firearm? They should not have access to cause harm out of the inability to handle conflict. And I think that's what we are seeing, is that whether as a young person or an adult, the inability to handle conflict is causing us to lose our tempers, but also lose our loved ones, to break down communities, to impact families. You know, we have children who are starting at the youngest age, who are losing their parents, their classmates. Like, can you imagine, like, the number one cause of premature death in our country for youth and kids and teens is gun violence, like something that's preventable. And that sickens me at every thought.
You know, I realize like a lot of the gun laws that we're even talking about are still new. You know, like I remember growing up and that just wasn't the case. And you would see the commercials on TV where children were finding their parents' guns loaded and playing with them, and that attributed to gun violence. And I'm sure that probably still attributes to gun violence, but it wasn't really a thought about like the gun safety aspect of it. And then came along the CCW aspect where, you know, it was really a promotion of you going through classes, understanding how to use a gun, store a gun, put it away. And people didn't like that. But then it came to, we took it away. And the stand your ground laws, now you don't need any training. You could just go get a gun and you could just tote it and carry it, which is absolutely scary. Especially in communities that are already impacted by violence, right? Like when you think about things that make the work harder, like the community violence intervention organizations, the community-based organizations who are working tirelessly to create safe communities, safe families, to save lives.
when you have laws that work against your work, it's really hard because you're having people tell us, I can carry this gun and you can. However, how do we do it safely? How do we talk about safe storage? Like, the solutions have been in place, and sometimes it feels like people or systems or programs get punished for progress. If you knew that accidental shootings were high and you knew that safe storage was important, that should have been something that continuously have been in place. Or that if you own a firearm, it's your responsibility to create safety for it. And I think too often people are saying, well, I'm getting a firearm to protect my family. And then that same firearm is used in either a suicidal attempt and or an accidental shooting or an act of intimate partner violence or conflict management in a community. So if you're really trying to save and protect your family, you have the responsibility to lock it up and store it properly.
So I'm a parent of 2 boys, 10 and 7. I guess my question would be, when should we even start talking about gun safety to kids to begin with?
As soon as possible, because the conversations are already starting. Like, my children play, what's it called? Roblox or something. And it's firearms used on there. And they're shooting in this digital space. And although I don't like it, it's a part of the things that they enjoy. And so how do we ensure that they see what's happening in this digital space is not transferable into our reality, that you can't just walk up on anybody and shoot them because you can do that there. But if you pay attention that when kids play games, they're like engaged and involved and like so hyped. And so I think that we need to have conversations with our children ASAP, because if we're not, social media is, YouTube is, their friends are. So like, how do we age appropriately talk about gun safety? One of the things that the Office of Violence Prevention is doing is that we're partnering with Cuyahoga County Board of Health, and we're offering family gun safety education classes throughout the county. And we're partnering with Parma Armory, and these classes are open where kids and families can come and learn about safe storage and gun education. And there are some people that are saying, well, why would you educate kids about firearms? Why wouldn't we? They're the group of people that are dying the fastest due to firearm violence. So they have to know what we can look like, what they can do and cannot do as it relates to firearm safety. So I would say, right after this podcast, go have a conversation.
Because I was thinking, my next question was going to be, whose responsibility is it to educate the public on gun safety?
I think it's all of our responsibility. I think there's a ton of knowledge accessible to us, whether it's ChatGPT, who's my homegirl, or Google, or just any web-based place. But if you own a firearm, it is your responsibility to not just educate yourself in the interest that you have for it, whether protection or a hobby, but to also educate everybody around you about, this is not a toy. This is something that can change your life or anyone else's lives if used improper. And so just like we educate ourselves about our cell phones, and anybody, how do you do this? Let me show you how to do it. Same thing with a firearm. We have to be able to have that same level of willingness to educate anyone who we love, our community, our friends, our family, our children, about this firearm that's so accessible to anybody ages 3 and up. Because I was in a situation where a 3-year-old shot their 7-year-old sibling in the head because there was no safe storage of the firearm. So ASAP.
So I feel very fortunate to have an Office of Violence Prevention, but that also means that there's a reason for it, right? That violence has grown so much that we maybe need it. Outside of the resources that you all offer, how do people really understand or gain knowledge on violence prevention?
Yeah. And that's a great question, too, because what I want to say about Cuyahoga County is that we're a well-resourced county. And while we're here having this conversation about violence prevention solutions and strategies, there's probably 5 other groups that's having this same conversation about like what's being done, how can we help, where should I start? And I think the importance about an Office of Violence Prevention is that it's the hub, that if anybody in our county has questions about violence prevention, needs to be connected to resources, want to coordinate an effort between government and community or systems and departments, that this office will be able to do that, to convene convene a group of people who are like-minded, who are saying enough is enough. Our communities do not deserve this. Our young people should not have to live in fear. Like, what do we need to do to eradicate this? And this is what the office is doing, but not alone. Like, creating this public safety ecosystem where it's like conversations with the NAACP is just as important as a violence prevention strategy. Working with our law enforcement partners is very important. Working with academia, with community-based organizations, with survivors who have survived the loss. All of us are needed in order to address this, because from your lens, violence prevention looks different than it does from my lens. And together, if the goal is the same, how do we meet at the core to be able to restore our communities and save lives?
So if you'll remember, because we were in that same age group when we were kids, that we grew up on Scruff, McGruff, and Dare, right?
Yeah.
You know, Dare to keep kids off of drugs. And I thought that was pretty effective. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. Mm-hmm. Are there programs that are similar now, but only aimed at like gun prevention and gun violence here in Cleveland?
So we have organizations like, of course, Cleveland Peacemakers. We have New Era Cleveland. We have Project Ripple, which is a really great organization. Speak Easy, Go Hard. There's Civilians Against Violence. Icons, the Safety Unit. Like, there are so many amazing organizations that are working towards violence prevention and use their own innovative way to engage with those who are at the highest risk of shooting or being shot. I think one of the things that needs to be considered is we're no longer just looking at one population of people who are driving the violence. We really have to look at this from a public health lens and say that all of us have been either directly or indirectly impacted by gun violence, and what is needed for all of us. Yes, it's really important to like dial in and relentlessly engage those who are at the highest risk of shooting or being shot. But what about their sibling who just saw their brother lose their life to violence, and now he doesn't qualify for a program because he's not a shooter. He hasn't been impacted by the criminal justice system, but he has these thoughts of like, I need to get me a gun now because my brother lost his life to gun violence. And so like we did COVID, or like the approach with seatbelts, how do we just create something that supports our entire county, where if I am even thinking about handling a conflict with a firearm, where can I go? Who should I be connected to? Or will I be told, oh, this is only for this type of person, you don't fit the criteria, so come back in 2 years when you pick up the gun and then handle a situation with it? How do we open this up to anybody? Because right now, I think the message is clear that all of us are impacted by this senseless disease of gun violence, and we need to address it as such. So those organizations and more, shout out to Ghetto Therapy for those who live in communities where violence is high. They can go to Ghetto Therapy every Wednesday from 6 to 8 and be able to talk through with like-minded residents about what can they do to create a community safety strategy in their place-based communities. But it's so many resources, and the goal is like, how do we get them coordinated so that you stop at A, B, and then C, and if you need to stop there, then cool, but if you need to go to D, there's a resource there too.
We had Walter Patton on a few episodes back, so shout out to Walter. I mean, he's awesome, and the work they're doing in Ghetto Therapy is awesome. I sit and I'm thinking about like gun prevention and how we go about preventing. And I didn't ask it, but in Cuyahoga County, is there a leading demographic that is mostly impacted by gun violence? Yeah,
and in Cuyahoga County and in our country, the demographic that are most impacted by gun violence is Black and brown people as victims and perpetrators. And I always like to talk about the divestment in communities, and some people have conversations about like Black on Black crime, but oftentimes it's about the proximity to people. And so if you're in a community where there's no grocery store, where it's over policed, there's no community activities, and I have a conflict with you, it's not because you're Black, it's because like you're the closest to me and it's on site, so it's not really Black on Black crime or violence. Is that if we don't invest in communities where people live and resources are low and desperation is high and hopelessness is is non-existent, what do you expect me to do? And so like, how do we not even paint that picture, but how do we speak truth to power that in under-resourced communities, violence is high throughout our country? And we have great examples throughout our county of communities that are well-resourced, that social determinants of health may be non-existent, and violence is low, especially gun violence, because I don't want to not address other forms of violence that are impacting safer communities, because said violence is happening all over the place.
Well, you said something I thought was pretty interesting. I mean, and I would have to believe that there is a strong correlation between economics and gun violence. Mm-hmm. So a person's socioeconomic status and where they live and how they're able to survive. And as it pertains to gun violence, I think that there has to be some strong set of correlation there. I think the thing that blows me away is that Black and brown communities are disproportionately affected, but are not the communities that own the most amount of guns. We don't have the most amount of guns in Black and brown communities. Where did they come from? How did they get there?
Yeah.
Who's giving them to us?
There's millions of conspiracy theories around that, but that's not my lane to talk about. But I do think that we're not, and I don't know the data, but I would say that if you think about the group of people in our city or our county who's always on a Cleveland Remembrance page for either driving the violence, and you think about the communities that they live in and the median income that their family may have, you're thinking like, well, how do you buy a firearm? Like, how can you afford it? And I haven't looked at the prices of firearms, but I don't know if it's in my budget. And then it's like, well, if underemployment and unemployment is high in these communities, how do we hold accountable the people who are actually legally buying these firearms and bringing them into communities where a young person told me the easiest thing to get in the hood is a gun? And it's just like, how? Easier than what? Easier than getting a bus pass? Easier than, going to the grocery store? Easier than going through the metal detector at school? Like, how is it that easy? Why is it that accessible? And then how do we talk about that? There's been some previous years, like gun buybacks, where people are saying, if you come to this event, we'll give you $20 if you turn your gun in. A young person told me while I was at Cleveland Peacemakers, like, why would I turn a gun in for $20 when this gun gets me hundreds of dollars? And like, if that's the mindset that we're competing against, how do we take these young people who are thinking by any means necessary, I got to figure it out, and give them the resources to reduce that barrier and be a solution? Because I want to believe people aren't waking up saying that I want to be violent or criminal, but they're saying if my needs aren't met and I have to be the person that's responsible for meeting those needs for my family, what am I willing to do, even if that means that I'm not alive or free? Like, how do we change that mindset by investing in these young people early on, or the person that's age 27, to say, what do you need to put down a gun and what can I put in your hand? And maybe it's something as simple as like, I want a job that I can work with pride. I don't want to work in a factory. And nothing is wrong with working in a factory, but why are those always the hard manual jobs given to people oftentimes who have been system impacted? Like, how do we create more organizations like New Era Cleveland and Cleveland Peacemakers that create second chances for people who have been impacted, who may have made some of those same decisions that I was talking about earlier, and give them an opportunity where they can add to the economy, where they can stop making decisions that will send them back into a system, and they can live a life as a law-abiding citizen because their needs are met.
So you said a lot, and I was thinking as you were talking, and I'm going like, whose responsibility? That's the main thing, just keeps popping in my mind. It would appear to me that it's equally just as much my responsibility as it is yours.
Absolutely.
Because if I educate my children at a younger age, and I let them know what's at stake, should they choose to go down this path and own a firearm, or put themselves in a situation, or just be in a situation where gun violence can happen to them, they need to know what to do, where they should go, and how they should move about the world. Yeah. And I think that I can't just rely on you to be that person. I need to, in some way, find how to collaborate with you to understand that this is what's happening. I need to have that conversation with my children. Maybe if I'm living in a violence community, I'm trying to find a way that I can identify resources to help the children in my community not go down that pathway.
Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely correct. I don't know how often your kids come home and tell you something that they've learned at school. And if we utilize that approach with our children at a young age, they can excitedly go to school and be like, you know what, if your parent have a firearm, they need to lock it up. If not, and if they, I'm thinking in my children, if they say, well, my parent doesn't have one. Well, my mom has gun locks at her office. Like, how do we utilize the influence of our children who are excited to learn and have them be the ambassadors of violence prevention at a young age? And then it's as simple as, too, like when you engage with the older population while they're like positive loitering at spots in communities, like how do we just pull up on them and ask them like, yo, what's up? And it's so simple as like asking them that question or like, how can I help? And sometimes the responses are so simple, like, I was just trying to, whatever it is. Like, I've heard it all. Like, what do you need? I'm just trying to get a bus pass because I don't get paid until next week and I got to work this week. Oh, that's all you need? Oh, I got you. There's a program over here that's giving bus passes to young people. But there's no shortage of resources, but there's a shortage and a gap in ensuring that the people that need the resources have them. And like, how do we ensure that dissemination of information gets to the people who need them the most? Because if not, what they're going to say as we're seeing these cuts, oh, they don't need that program down there in King Kennedy. Nobody even comes to the program. How do we take the resources to them? And it's not an enabling act, but there are so many barriers that can cause a person or a family to not be able to take advantage of an amazing program. And how do we ensure that they have the means to get there and take advantage of it?
All right, so I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask you some fun questions.
Okay.
If people who are listening, how can they get in contact with the Office of Violence Prevention?
So for everybody that's on social media, we're at Cuyahoga County OVP on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter, I believe. And if you can't find the Office of Violence Prevention, just go to cuyahogacounty.gov website, and there's a host of resources including this page. We have email, ovp@cuyahogacounty.gov. And I have a cell phone number and an office phone that I don't know offhand, but I'm sure it can be linked to the resource page here. And that's the easiest way.
Okay. I appreciate that. We talked a lot. You carry a heavy load. One of my fun questions for you is, how do you relax after like working in this space and being in such intense environments? Yeah. How does Myesha relax?
And I get that question all the time. And I'm just like, when you work in such a space like this, you're always on, because when violence happens, people typically call a trusted, credible person. And for many years, and even now, I'm that person where it's just like, Myesha, this happened. Can you help me? And I'm trying to connect people in real time to resources that happens immediately. When I do have time to rest, which is hard, and I wish that I was a person that's like, some people fake busy. Like, I wish I was one of those people because I'm always on. But my children will very quickly put me in position to rest because they so graciously share me with the world. And so when I'm doing too much, they'll just say, Mommy, we need your time. And I can't be everything to everybody else and not anything to my children. And so when they throw up the Batman signal, I'm just like, okay, cool. I gotta relax. But it's not easy for me to disconnect because lives are on the stake, right? Like, I'm not folding t-shirts. Like, these are lives that are dependent on not just me, you, Cleveland Peacemakers, New Era Cleveland, like Ghetto Therapy. They're dependent on us to show up. And so I'm grateful that I have people like you that if I'm not, that you'll be there.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that. Last question is a fun question. Okay. I love to ask everybody, what's on your playlist right now?
Yo, Ella May got me in a chokehold. Okay. The 90s love is like all over me, like no skips. Ella May has me LMA has me trying to find a husband. Or let me change that. My husband's gonna find me, but LMA got me. I was listening to LMA on my way here.
Listen, I'm gonna have to listen to it because it's a vibe, and everybody's telling me I've heard T.I., I've heard LMA. I'm hearing so much right now.
J. Cole fire too, and he coming to the city.
So I'm always about new music. So yes. I mean, I feel like that's what help us get through the day.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so Myesha, I want to thank you just for taking the time out of your busy day to come and talk to us and just tap in. Is there anything else you want to say to our audience before you part?
I would like to say thank you to the NAACP Cleveland branch for all that you do. I wish there was an opportunity where communities that are the most impacted can see and feel the great work that you all do. And I know that there are several different audiences, and those who are really into social justice, it's like, I know where to find the NAACP, but how do we raise awareness about who you all are to the city of Cleveland, and where does that start? And if I could be a partner in doing that, even if we campaign around violence prevention, like, I'm ready. I got my tennis shoes in the car. We take these off.
Let's do it.
Hit the streets, take the podcast to the gas stations, get the people talking.
I love it. Let's do it. Let's do it. So I want to thank you all for taking time to tune in today. This has been another awesome episode of the Cleveland Pulse. We look forward to catching up with you again. But if I don't see you before the next time I record, do the best to take care of yourself. Peace.